All right, let's dive right into this chilling explainer. Today, we're cracking open a really unusual investigative case file, one that documents some deeply bizarre events at a roadside motel on Route 17. We're talking about an anomaly that completely defies all conventional logic. We'll be looking at a highly detailed sequence of events, all recorded by a night shift worker, and tracking exactly how a totally mundane graveyard shift evolved into this deeply disturbing mystery. By breaking down the structure of these events, we're going to see firsthand how an impossible situation escalated into something truly sinister. The source material actually kicks off with a rather ominous quote from the motel owner: "Some things don't check out." And man, is that an understatement. We're going to analyze the eerie logs from a night worker who stumbled into a paradox that started with just a ringing phone and a warning. You know, if you've ever worked a graveyard shift, you know how the isolation can kind of play tricks on your mind, right? Like the hum of a vending machine suddenly sounds like a muffled conversation. But in this case, the data proves it wasn't just imagination. What makes this explainer so fascinating is how the worker essentially becomes this impromptu investigator, logging data points in an environment that literally breaks the rules of reality. The stage is set at Motel Horizon, a quiet stopover where the silence is absolute, until it suddenly isn't.
So, Part 1. The Impossible Anomaly, a vacant room that never sleeps.
To really wrap our heads around this case, we need to establish the baseline of this motel. Normally, you expect pretty standard stuff on a night shift. Truckers, lost tourists, maybe just vast stretches of dead silence. That's the norm. But then there's room 404, which presents this glaring, impossible anomaly. The phone in there never stops ringing. And the absolute kicker here, as noted right in the logs, is that room 404 has been entirely empty, completely vacant, and locked up tight for 6 consecutive years. A ringing landline from a totally dead room. Crazy, right? Now, the documentation gets incredibly specific about the timeline. During the worker's third week on the job, the impossible happened at exactly 2:47 a.m. The front desk phone just screams to life, and the caller ID definitively flashes room 404. Now, this wasn't some technical glitch or a phantom ring. The system actively registered a call originating from a room that physically could not have a human being inside of it. The worker, just following standard protocol, picks up the receiver, probably expecting a weird system error or maybe a confused guest in the next room over. But instead of static or an angry guest, the worker hears a little girl whispering. She says it's cold and asks to turn the light on. Well, the worker checks the system, confirms for a fact the room is vacant, but politely engages the caller anyway. And that's when they get this chilling response. "Daddy said not to leave the closet, but it's dark." Right after that, the line goes completely dead. Naturally, this prompts a totally logical reaction, a panicked 6 a.m. call to the motel owner. But the owner, he offers absolutely zero technical support, just a really dire warning. Don't go to 404 and don't answer it after midnight.
Moving into Part 2, analyzing the audio logs, patterns in the static.
Let's look at how this whole thing escalates. Because honestly, instead of just ignoring the calls like any normal person probably would, the worker actually starts recording them. They stick a recorder right under the desk, completely turning this from a spooky campfire story into a deliberate data collection operation. And these audio logs revealed a really strict, predictable pattern that happened every single night within a super tight 5-minute window. Right between 2:45 a.m. and 2:50 a.m., the anomaly would trigger. It was totally localized, highly repetitive, and basically ran like clockwork.
For 11 consecutive nights, the data didn't budge. Every single call consisted of the exact same 3 phrases, spoken in a repetitive loop. First, the request for a light. Second, the instruction to stay in the closet. And third, the truly terrifying question of why the door won't open. Analytically, the repetition here is just fascinating. It's exactly like a record skipping, right? An auditory haunting just trapped in a very specific, terrifying moment in time. But, as we know with any dataset, a prolonged constant is almost always disrupted by a sudden variable. And on the 12th night, that predictable data was violently disrupted. The 3-step loop just broke. Right after the little girl spoke her final line, the audio shifted to include this muffled, angry man's voice commanding her to shut up. I said, "Stay quiet." This was immediately followed by a loud, heavy thud and then absolute silence. The sequence had evolved. Whatever historical event this audio loop was replaying, it was clearly progressing toward a really violent conclusion.
Okay, Part 3, the 2018 police report. Behind the locked door?
Driven by these escalating recordings, the worker decides to shift from just listening to actual physical investigation. At 3 p.m., broad daylight, when the motel is totally empty, they take a master key and actually open room 404. And what they documented inside was literally a room frozen in time. The dust hadn't been touched at all. But critically, and this is the part that really gets me, they found these desperate, deep gouges clawed into the wood on the inside of the closet door. And right there, half buried in the dust on the floor, a tiny red hair clip. The physical evidence perfectly corroborated those audio logs of a terrified girl trapped in the dark.
And then they found the definitive piece of the puzzle. Tucked away behind the bed, the worker uncovers an official police report detailing a tragic cold case from exactly 6 years prior. It documented a missing 6-year-old girl named Emma Cole, who was last seen on March 14, 2018, right there in room 404 of Motel Horizon. Her father, Thomas Cole, was found deceased from suicide out in the motel parking lot. And the little girl? She was never located. So that horrific audio loop the worker had been recording all week, that was the literal echo of Emma's final known moments.
Which brings us to part 4, the anniversary escalation. March 13th.
Now this is exactly where all these disparate pieces of data suddenly slam together. The worker checks the date on that police report and realizes something absolutely terrifying. Emma disappeared on March 14th, and according to the worker's own daily logs, today is March 13th. So this anomaly isn't just some random haunting. It is actively building up to a climax. The night of March 13th is the eve of the 6-year anniversary, meaning whatever violent event that audio has been hinting at all week is about to peak.
Sure enough, that night at exactly 2:47 a.m., the phone rings again. But the parameters have completely changed this time. The little girl's voice doesn't sound like it's being filtered through a crackly telephone wire anymore. According to the worker's notes, it sounded incredibly close, like she was standing right inside the office with them. Faced with this terrifying proximity, the worker makes a huge critical decision. They break the observational cycle. Instead of just passively listening, they speak her name directly, saying, "Emma, I'm here, I hear you." They actively interact with the anomaly. Well, that interaction fundamentally altered the entire phenomenon. Right after the worker spoke, there were about 5 agonizing seconds of absolute dead silence on the line. And then Emma delivers this terrifying warning. "He's coming for you now." At that exact moment, the physical reality of the motel office was breached. The office door right behind the worker slowly creaked open. That safe, comfortable separation between the past events of room 404 and the present reality of the front desk, yeah, that had completely collapsed.
The source material then documents this incredibly rapid, chilling sequence of auditory evidence out in the hallway, strongly suggesting that the tragic events of 2018 are physically repeating themselves. Step 1, the phone cuts out completely. Next, there's the undeniable sound of heavy boots marching down the corridor. Then, the sickening sound of something heavy being dragged across the floor. And finally, the footsteps just stop, dead in their tracks, right outside room 404. It's essentially a live auditory recreation of the father returning to the room, but this time around, the worker is caught right in the middle of the playback.
The documentation abruptly concludes here, not with any sort of neat resolution to the worker's situation, but with a stark set of explicit survival rules. If you are ever traveling Route 17, avoid Motel Horizon entirely. If you somehow end up there, never take room 404. And most importantly, do not answer the front desk phone at 2:47 a.m. The worker's final notes assert a really grim theory. Some calls never actually end. The haunting isn't just a historical echo. It's a trap just waiting for an observer to engage with it. It's a pretty harsh reminder that in some of these investigations, observing the data actually makes you a part of it. As for the worker's final fate, it's left completely, terrifyingly unknown.
So, the major takeaway we're left with in this explainer is a truly chilling mystery of endless cycles. We've traced this data all the way from a single impossible phone call, straight through to the unearthing of a tragic cold case, ending with the absolute collapse of safety for that night worker. It just brilliantly illustrates how observing an anomaly can sometimes pull you right into the thick of it. Which really leaves us with one final deeply unsettling question to ponder based on these logs. If that landline phone rings again tonight at exactly 2:47 a.m., who is going to be the next person to pick it up?